Welcome to Middle Math Academy, Ratio Tables and Graphing, level number 4. If you're looking for some practice without the graphing, check out Ratio Tables levels number 1 through 3. Our learning targets today are I can write equivalent ratios in a ratio table, and I can graph equivalent ratios on a coordinate plane. Go ahead and pause the video and rate yourself 1 through 5. How confident do you feel about these learning targets before we get started today? 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Now let's take a look at our notes. Remember to write what I write, and remember you can always pause the video if you need more time. Our first note is ratio tables represent equivalent ratios. Equivalent ratios have the same value, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. We graph equivalent ratios by using quantities from the ratio table to create ordered pairs. Make sure you have this down. Step number 1 says fill in the ratio table using the ratio description. For every 12 inches, there is 1 foot. So in my ratio table, under feet, I'm going to write 1. And then under inches, I'm going to write 12. So every time my feet increases by 1, my inches will increase by 12. So 12 plus 12 is 24. And ratio tables are all about patterns. So I'm going to continue this pattern. My feet, we increase that by 1. My inches, we increase by 12. Just say 36. Pause the video and fill in the rest of this table on your own. Now that we've filled in our ratio table, step number 2 is to figure out the value of the ratio. To determine the value of the ratio, we're going to divide. I'm going to take one of my inches values. I'll choose this row right here. So I'm going to take 36 inches divided by 3 feet. And 36 divided by 3 is 12. The great thing about ratio tables is you can always divide your quantities and get the same value. If you don't get the same value, that's a signal to you that something's off. If I do another example, let's say this row right here. If I take 84 inches, and remember when you divide, you have to keep the order the same, and I divide it by 7 feet, 84 divided by 7 is 12. So the value of our ratio is 12. We can always take our feet and multiply it by 12 to get our inches, or we can always take our inches and go the opposite way, divide it by 12 to get our feet. Make sure you have this down, and then we're going to go to step number 3. Step number 3 says label your x and y axis with the quantities from the ratio table. So our horizontal number line, that is our x-axis, and our vertical number line, that is our y. I always remember that this is our y because if I just add a little line right here, it looks like a y. Anywho, in today's level 4 lesson, your graphs are already scaled for you, so the numbers are already here for you, but we still need to have a label for our x and y. So let's do that now. So we have 1 through 12 down here, so I know that that represents our feet. Make sure you're writing with me and make sure you have a capital F. And then our y-axis, we're going to label inches. Now, I remember when I was learning this, I would always struggle to come up with a title, which is step number 4. But what's really nice about graphs is you can just take your y and your x and make that your title and just put a little verses between them. So I'm going to start with inches and I'm going to write inches versus feet, basically showing us we're comparing our inches and our feet. Pause if you need more time. Our last step is we are going to graph the equivalent ratios as ordered pairs. So when you think of a pair, you probably think of two, right? If your teacher says work in pairs, that means work with two people, like as a total. So our ordered pair for this first one would be 1, comma, 12. 1 represents our x and 12 represents our y. So I'm going to go to our feet, which we have 1, and then I'm going to go up to our inches, which we have 12, and I'm just going to put a dot right at that intersection. So we did our first one. Our second one is 2. You could even put a comma here if that's easier. 24. So I'm going to go over to 2 and then up to 24 and put a dot. One helpful way to remember how to graph is think about it like dunking a basketball. When you dunk a basketball, you have to run first. So we're going to run to the x-axis and then you jump. Okay, so then you jump up. So run left or right first, then jump. Okay, our next one, we have 336. Going to run to 3 and jump to 36. Go ahead and fill in the rest of these in your graph. Pause the video, come back once you're done. This is what you should have for the rest of your graph. If you don't, that's okay. Just correct your errors and then go ahead and flip to page number 2. Page number 2 says, fill in the values in the ratio table using the ratio description. So let's just start with just number 1. Problem A says, for every 2 miles ran, it takes 15 minutes. So that ratio is already filled in our table, and we're just going to continue with that ratio. So if I add another 2, I get 4. Every time I increase my distance by 2, I'm increasing my minutes by 15. So 15 plus 15 is 30. And I'll keep repeating that. I'll increase again by 2. And again by 15. 30 plus 15 is 45. Now, you don't always want to rely on this method of increasing the same amount. We also can look at our relationship across our ratio table. But for now, let's just keep filling in this and following this pattern. Pause the video, come back once you're finished filling in this ratio table. So for your distance, you should have skip counted by 2s. Check your work, fix any errors. And for our minutes, you should have increased by 15. Check your work, fix any errors. So we completed step number 1. We filled in the values in our ratio table. Step number 2 says write the value of the ratio. So to remember to find the value of the ratio, we divide. So I'm going to take my minutes and divide it by my distance. And you can choose any 2 values. I like to do it twice just to make sure that I have the correct answer, but I'll just randomly choose this one right here. So I'll take 75 minutes and I'll divide it by 10 miles. And 75 divided by 10 is 7 5/10. That is the value of our ratio. You could have chosen any two values that are next to each other and you would have gotten 7 and 5/10. So let's go ahead and write that up here. All right, now we completed step number 2. Step number 3, we're going to label our title, x-axis, and y-axis with the quantities from the ratio table. So remember, the numbers are already labeled for you. So for counting by twos down here, that means that represents our distance ran in our miles. So let's label that first. And you want to write it the same way that it's listed in the ratio table. So distance ran miles. And then our y-axis is time in minutes. And then our title, we're going to take our y, exactly how it's written, and write versus our x. So we have our time in minutes versus our distance ran in miles. Remember, pause the video if you need more time. We've now completed step number 3. And then our last step is we're going to just graph our values from our ratio tables and treat them like ordered pairs. So remember, when we dunk a basketball, we run first and then we jump. So if our distance ran is 2, we're going to run over to 2 and up to 15. Our next one is 4:30. Go and run over to 4, up to 30, and so on. Go ahead and pause this video. Come back once you're done filling in this graph. So now you're going to check your work in the graph. If there are any errors, make sure to fix them. And now I want you to complete the rest of page 2 and page 3. Then come back to the video. All right, on page 4, we're continuing to practice the same skills you practice on 2 and 3. What I want you to do is complete problem E, pause the video, and then come back. Check your work for problem E, fix any errors. Complete the rest of page 4 and page 5, then come back to the video. Head to page 6 if you're not already there. Independently complete this common misconception problem, pause the video, then come back. This problem says, Sophie is making apple pie. She made a table that shows a relationship between the number of apples and the number of pies she can make. Sophie made an error on one row. What row has an error? What should the correct number of apples be on the row that has the error? So whenever you're looking at a table, make sure you look at the headers so you know what the numbers represent. A lot of times I see students get confused with this column. Well, these just represent our rows so that you can say which part of this table is wrong. All right, so let's look at and see if we can figure out the pattern in this table. So we have our number of pies, 2, and it says our apples is 6. So I know that when I multiply 2 times 3, I get 6. Let's check if that pattern continues. Well, is 4 times 3 9? No. Let's go to the next one. Is 6 times 3 18? Yep. So that tells me that 3 is probably the value of our ratio, but let's keep checking. 8 times 3 is 24, and 10 times 3 is 30. So we could always multiply our pies times 3 to get our apples, except in one row. In the row that it did not work, is row number 2. So our second question says, what should the correct number of apples be? Well, if we multiply 4, like we did for the rest of them, times 3, our apples should be 12. Make sure you have this down. If you don't, fix any errors, then come back to the video. Our closing problem says, make up your own ratio description on the line below. If you need help, I would go and look at some problems that you've done today. A lot of times, ratio descriptions use the keywords for every. For every 6 dogs, there's 3 cats. Something like that. You're going to come up with your own. After you come up with your own, create a ratio table that goes with your description. And then you're going to make a graph. I'm going to challenge you to try to figure out what to count by with your numbers on the X and the Y. And once again, look at examples we've already done today to help you. Go ahead and complete the closing problem, then come back to the video. To close out today, we're going to answer our debrief questions and then rate ourselves on our learning target after the lesson. So go ahead and complete these 3 questions. Once you finish these 3 questions, you're going to go back to page number 1 and rate yourself after the lesson. At the beginning of the lesson, you rated yourself 1 through 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. Now that you've gotten practice in, I want you to rate yourself again. If you're interested in more ratio tables and graphing, please check out ratio tables and graphing level number 5. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining Middle Math Academy.